Hello, everyone. For 3 millennia, our world was terrorized by a deadly virus. The illness it caused was so agonizing and lethal that anyone infected faced a 30% chance of not surviving. To put it simply, 1 out of every 3 infected people would die from it. And for those who did survive, the disease left its permanent mark. Their bodies, especially their faces, were scarred for life with deep, disfiguring spots. Many survivors were also left permanently blind. When this plague swept through Japan in 1735, it killed a full third of the country's population. When European colonists carried it to Mexico and the Americas in the 1500s, it wiped out an astonishing 90% of the native tribal populations. In the 18th century, this disease was responsible for the death of 1 in every 7 children born in Russia. Entire empires and civilizations were erased from history by this single virus. It's estimated that it claimed 5 million lives every single year. Over a century, that added up to 500 million deaths. 500 million people killed. In comparison, the recent COVID-19 pandemic seems almost minor. Throughout history, this disease was known by many names: the speckled monster, the red plague, the pox. In India, it was referred to as Mata Lagna, meaning to be afflicted by the goddess. But the name it is most remembered by is smallpox. Now, what's fascinating is that during the 1700s, while this disease was causing devastation worldwide, there was a quiet village in England where the local farm workers seemed to be completely immune. It was a total mystery. It was as if the villagers there possessed some kind of superpower that protected them from this dangerous virus. Smallpox appeared in human society thousands of years ago. It was a contagious virus that spread with incredible speed. Smallpox is the most formidable and devastating disease in human history. Before vaccination was developed, smallpox was one of the planet's biggest killers. Smallpox vaccination is the single tool responsible for eradicating this disease from vast regions of the world. It is a true monster. Friends, smallpox was a viral illness caused by the variola virus, which belongs to the orthopox virus family. Other viruses in this same category include monkeypox and cowpox. Smallpox was extremely contagious and spread with terrifying ease. The respiratory droplets from a simple sneeze or cough could transmit it. It could be passed through an infected person's saliva, through contact with the rashes on their skin, or even by touching contaminated surfaces like towels, bedsheets, or clothing. Once a person was infected, the first symptoms resembled a common cold. But soon, rashes would begin to appear all over the body. These rashes then developed into fluid-filled boils, which in Hindi were called phafol. The person's face and body would become covered in them. The appearance is quite graphic to describe, so I won't go into further detail, nor will I show you any pictures. If you're curious, you can search for images of a smallpox patient on Google after this video. After about 8 to 16 days of enduring headaches, vomiting, rashes, and high fever, the infected person would often die. As I mentioned, the death rate was 30%. If you contrast that with COVID-19, its death rate is less than 1%. Perhaps the most tragic aspect was its impact on children. It infected them more frequently, and the mortality rate among children was even higher. So, where did this disease originate? How did it start? Nobody knows for sure. But the leading theory is that around 10,000 BC, when humans first began practicing agriculture and forming farming settlements in Africa, they started domesticating animals like cattle. This brought humans into close and prolonged contact with them. Since orthopox viruses are commonly found in these types of mammals, it's assumed the virus jumped to humans from there. Some scientists also theorize it may have originated in rodents. The earliest physical evidence of smallpox dates back to 1156 BC. An ancient Egyptian mummy, preserved from that time, was discovered with the same distinctive facial scarring caused by the disease. It's also described in ancient texts from India and China. For example, it is mentioned in the Sanskrit text Susruta Samhita, written around the 6th century BC. For all those centuries, we found no cure for this deadly illness. Even today, modern medicine has no cure for smallpox. However, there was one thing people understood early on: the concept of immunity. They noticed that individuals who survived a smallpox infection never got sick from it again. Based on this, several doctors theorized that one way to protect people would be to intentionally infect them with a very small amount of the virus. The hope was that it would make them sick, but not kill them, and they would then be immune for life. This procedure is called inoculation. It is believed to have originated in either India or China. Around the 18th century, a group of Brahmins in India, known as tikadars, performed these inoculations. They would take scabs from the skin of a person infected with smallpox. Then, they would use an iron needle to make a small prick on the arm of a healthy person and place the infectious scab material onto the open wound. In 11th century China, records show that Buddhist monks in the Tibetan mountains would collect these same scabs, grind them into a fine powder, and then blow the powder into the nostrils of a healthy person. These methods eventually spread from Asia to the Ottoman Empire and then into Europe. But this inoculation process had a major flaw. What guarantee was there that the small dose of the virus wouldn't be enough to cause a full-blown, fatal infection? There was none. Because of this, about 1% to 2% of people who were inoculated actually died from the procedure. They contracted smallpox and suffered a painful death. Still, a 1 to 2% death rate was far better than the 30% death rate from catching it naturally. So many people chose to take the risk. A second issue was that even those who survived inoculation were left with permanent scars on their faces. A third problem was that inoculated individuals were still contagious and could spread the virus to others. Now let's return to that village in Gloucestershire, England, in the 18th century, where that mystery was unfolding. The farmers and milkmaids who worked with cattle there simply were not getting smallpox. In 1795, a doctor named Edward Jenner decided to investigate. When he spoke to the villagers, they shared a local belief. Anyone who had caught cowpox, another disease, would never get smallpox. Cowpox was a different illness, but it was nowhere near as deadly. Jenner began to wonder, could contracting cowpox really provide protection against smallpox? If true, it could be a simple solution to this global killer. There was only one way to find out: through experiments and evidence. In May 1796, a milkmaid named Sarah, who was sick with cowpox, came to Dr. Jenner for treatment. Dr. Jenner carefully drew pus from the boils on her hand and saved it. This was his opportunity to test his theory, but he needed a test subject. Dr. Jenner's gardener had an 8-year-old son named James. Jenner approached the boy, pricked his arm, and deliberately infected him with the pus from the cowpox lesion. A few days later, the boy developed a fever from cowpox, but soon recovered. 6 weeks after that, Dr. Jenner took material from a fresh smallpox lesion and then intentionally exposed the same boy to the smallpox virus. Today, performing such an experiment on a child would not only be considered deeply unethical, but also illegal. But things were different then. Such laws and moral standards did not exist. Infecting a child with smallpox meant there was a very real chance he could die. Thankfully, that did not happen. The boy had developed complete immunity to smallpox. This single experiment proved not only that cowpox could prevent smallpox, but also that this protection could be transferred intentionally from one person to another. Friends, this meant that Dr. Jenner had invented the world's first vaccine, the world's first successful vaccine. And that young boy was the first person ever to be vaccinated. In fact, the word vaccination was coined by Dr. Jenner himself. It comes from the Latin word vacca, which means cow. Because a virus from a cow was providing protection, he derived the term from it. Today, of course, the word has a much broader meaning and is used for all types of vaccines. Vaccination was dramatically safer than inoculation. The 1% to 2% risk of death from the old method was reduced to almost zero. The chance of dying from cowpox was negligible. We now understand exactly how this works. The cowpox and smallpox viruses are both from the orthopox family. They are so biologically similar that when our immune system learns to fight off cowpox, it can recognize and defeat a similar-looking virus like smallpox when it attacks. The antibodies created from the first infection are effective against the second, allowing us to survive without harm. Recently, another orthopox virus, monkeypox, has been spreading. It's from the same family. Fortunately, according to the World Health Organization, it is much less severe than smallpox, not as contagious, and its death rate is around 3% to 6%. Some studies have even found that the old smallpox vaccine offers some protection against it. When Dr. Jenner presented his discovery to the world, you might think he was met with universal praise for his brilliant work that could save millions. But the actual reaction was the complete opposite. Dr. Jenner faced a severe backlash and was widely ridiculed. When he submitted his findings to the Royal Society of London, they rejected his paper. The president of the society even advised Jenner to abandon his wild research. But Dr. Jenner was determined. He conducted more experiments, collected more data, and published his findings himself in a book. Over time, Many scientists and doctors were convinced, but persuading the public was an immense struggle. Many religious groups opposed vaccination, claiming it was unnatural and went against God's plan. Some people were disgusted by the idea of putting animal matter from a cow into a human body. In many parts of Europe, a bizarre fear spread that getting the vaccine would cause people to slowly turn into a cow. Painters and cartoonists mocked the idea, drawing people sprouting horns and hooves. The inoculators, whose livelihood was threatened by this new, safer method, also protested vaccination fiercely. Eventually, governments recognized the vaccine's effectiveness and began to mandate it. In 1853, England was the first country to make smallpox vaccination compulsory for all children. This is when the first anti-vax movements in history emerged, with groups and organizations forming to campaign against mandatory vaccination. Another huge challenge for Dr. Jenner was getting the vaccine to the rest of the world. How could it be transported? What about countries that had no cowpox? He had to find a way to get the cowpox virus there first. He developed three main methods. First, he would soak a long string in cowpox pus. Once it was dry, he would ship it. People at the destination would be told to make a small cut on their skin and place the dried string on the wound. This is how the vaccine reached Canada in 1800. The problem was, this method didn't work for very long-distance sea voyages, as the string would lose its potency. The second method was to transport the cowpox fluid in glass tubes, sealed with wax. This is how the vaccine reached many other European cities. But the third and most bizarre method, which turned out to be the most successful, was using children. Children who were recently infected with cowpox were put on ships and transported to distant lands. They served as living incubators for the virus. To keep a fresh supply, healthy people were also on board, and a doctor would vaccinate them in a chain, one after another, during the voyage. By the time the ship arrived, there was always someone with a fresh, active cowpox lesion ready to be used for vaccinations. The first cowpox vaccine arrived in India in 1802 via the Middle East. But unfortunately, in a country as vast and poor as India, it was not easy to get the vaccine to every person. For the next 150 years, the vaccine failed to reach the majority of the population. As a result, in 1974, India suffered a catastrophic smallpox outbreak. By this time, most of the world had achieved at least 80% vaccination coverage. Years earlier, in 1958, the Soviet Union's health minister had persuaded the World Health Organization, WHO, to launch a global campaign to completely eradicate smallpox. That program officially began the same year. But India remained a major problem area. Our government had launched the National Smallpox Eradication Program in 1962, spending a great deal of money to manufacture vaccines and train health workers. By 1966, about 60 million people had been vaccinated, but it wasn't nearly enough. The number of infections continued to climb. In 1974, India experienced its worst-ever smallpox epidemic. In just 5 months, more than 15,000 people died. At that moment, 86% of all smallpox cases in the entire world were in India. There were many reasons for this. India's huge population, constant migration of people, and limited media reach made it incredibly difficult to inform everyone about the need for a vaccine. The tikadars, who still practiced inoculation, continued to protest. Many people still held superstitious beliefs, thinking smallpox was caused by the anger of the goddess Shatala, and they chose to pray in temples instead of getting vaccinated. Many religious individuals also rejected the vaccine because of its origin from cows. On top of that, the vaccination methods of the 1970s were still quite painful, and the Indian summer heat often caused the vaccines to spoil. This is why, in 1970, the WHO and the Indian government joined forces to create a new, aggressive plan to wipe out the virus from India. In 1971, a team of 4 WHO medical officers arrived. India signed an agreement to get the first freeze-dried vaccines, which were much easier to store and transport. New, less painful vaccination techniques were introduced. Teams were sent to the most remote corners of the country to persuade people, especially parents of children, to accept this vital vaccine. Posters were put up everywhere to promote vaccination. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi personally asked citizens to cooperate. The government even offered a reward of 100 rupees for reporting a case of smallpox. Radio was used constantly to explain the importance of the vaccine to the public. Finally, these combined efforts were so successful that in 1975, the last case of smallpox in India was recorded. After that, the disease was eradicated from the country forever. For people born in or before 1975, If you look at the upper arms of your parents or grandparents, you might see a small, round scar. That is the mark left by the smallpox vaccine. The WHO ran similar intensive campaigns in Africa and South America. Thanks to these global efforts, the last naturally occurring case of smallpox in the world was seen in 1977 in Somalia. The last person to ever die from this disease was an English medical photographer who was accidentally exposed in a laboratory in 1978. And then, friends, in 1979, the World Health Organization officially declared that smallpox had been completely eradicated from the planet. Since that day, not a single case of smallpox has been seen in the world. If you are around my age or were born after 1980, you have never needed a smallpox vaccine because the virus no longer exists in the wild. Can you imagine how a single discovery by Dr. Jenner changed the world for the better? It's estimated that every year, 5 million lives are saved simply because this vaccine was created and this disease was eliminated. Shockingly, we still don't have a cure for smallpox, but we never needed one. We prevented it through vaccination and wiped it out. Today, only 2 known samples of the live smallpox virus remain. They are stored in 2 of the world's most secure laboratories, one under the control of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the other at a state research center in Russia. The virus samples are kept there for research purposes. However, a fear remains that someone could one day genetically engineer the virus or leak it from a lab, potentially causing another devastating outbreak. Friends, this was the story of the world's first vaccine. I hope you found this video informative.